My goal is to demonstrate to my company how Bitcoin can be used integrating with systems in a way that streamlines business processes and overtly reduces costs. So you take all of the political aspects and the cryptocurrency, you take all that out and just demonstrate where no one can look at this solution and say, I'm not going to use that because it's so much more efficient than what's going on today.
Joshua Henslee is an IT consultant who wants to integrate the Bitcoin SV blockchain into his clients' business systems. I met him at the CoinGeek conference in Toronto, and we discussed how to promote new solutions within the established tech industry.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
So Joshua, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
So now you work with Microsoft products that you are working with clients to integrate into their systems. What are the issues about trying to introduce Bitcoin SV or blockchain technology into that world?
The primary issue I'm facing is the paradigm between that and the private blockchains. So most companies, they see the blockchain as buzzword, so naturally they want to get involved. I've been told since I'm too young to remember it, but that it's similar to the .com bubble, where you just append .com. It's similar where companies want to get in. Oh, it's blockchain.
They don't want to miss out on anything.
Right, but they're also adverse to putting their data on a public ledger, which is kind of equivalent to the cloud server movement, which now is just accepted. So now companies have no issues putting their data on a private cloud server, but it's kind of the same thing with the public blockchain if you secure it, because it's just something that everyone has access to, but it's just I think that understanding is lacking.
So what happens when you say, well, you're perfectly okay with the cloud? What's the difference between that and the public aspect of blockchain?
I think it's just the lack of understanding. I think one thing that can bridge that is the recent hacks, and by recent, maybe 3, 4, or 5 years. Marriott had a huge database hack with credit cards. Target, they were storing credit card numbers in clear text in their system somewhere, and people got a hold of that. Even one of our clients, the whole reason we had to do an upgrade for them was because they had their web provider got hacked.
Really?
Yeah. So if that never happened, they wouldn't have had to do a project so soon. I mean, I think they were going to upgrade in the future, but there's a huge cost with that, right? So the ironic thing is they were keeping the credit card data in some SQL database or whatever, but they got hacked, and as a result, that affected one of their clients. So now they have to come to us for services, which, it brings into question, what is truly secure, right? What is the best method for doing it? And I think people will probably look for better options, but the whole blockchain space, I think that is just misunderstood, and that might be contributing to the resistance of these companies wanting to jump on board.
But if you did come across a client from a big company who said, oh, well, I'm just not worried, let's go with this, is there stuff out there that you would say, fine, well, it's all ready to go, or are we still waiting for that to be properly developed?
I think we do need some applications and implemented to show them what can be done. I think that's still missing. I do think we have the technology with the recent developments over the past 4 or 5 months on the BSV chain. However, with that said, it brings in the argument about the scaling. So if a company did it, high transactions, you cannot have it to where they fill the blocks up and then get turned away because there's performance problems and fees and high cost, because that would be catastrophic.
But BSV has sort of solved that, hasn't it?
It to some degree, but I mean, if a huge corporation did happen to come on board, and if they eclipse the limits that are in place now, that would probably be more detrimental than beneficial. So I think that maybe a smaller one, or expectations have to be set to make sure that whoever's implementing it needs to be cognizant of the limits, and maybe only put one transaction type on the chain. So they make sure they don't get all bent out of shape if they try to put all this data and they ended up hitting the upper ceiling.
From the point of view of a business like you're in, you're not working for Microsoft, but you're working with Microsoft products, right?
That's right.
I guess it would be much more profitable for you to be selling your services in relation to BSV products, wouldn't it?
I've thought about this a lot. I mean, it's a constant war that's gone on in my head ever since I went to the last CoinGeek conference in November. I actually walked away thinking, actually making that consideration, that if, went full-time working on Bitcoin, but I've had enough, I realize I've worked with a lot of talented people in my practice, and a path to merge those two is probably better in the long run. Maybe not so much profitable for myself immediately, but long term, because we have the tools, the interface with Microsoft and other products and other clients to get the name out there to sell. It's more like leaning on them, using both of us to make do more damage, so to speak, in the industry.
But I wasn't really meaning so much for your own profit and loss, but for a consultancy business like that.
Oh, I see.
If they're not having to pay licenses to Microsoft, the same service or the equivalent service would be much more profitable for them to provide using BSV, I guess.
Yes, there is cost saving, and that is the value proposition, in my opinion, for integrating systems. Is the services being used today are expensive, and if they use Bitcoin for some of these things, the BSV blockchain, they would see significant cost savings.
Well, that's a powerful argument.
It is. And it's just balance. It's walking that tightrope of, okay, you need to understand not the risk. Risk is not the right word, but the implications of you doing this, right? And I think some companies are starting to wake up to this. They're starting to see it. There's the question, right? Some client might ask, why do we have all these private blockchains? How many do we need, right? So it's kind of, I can see a shift in sentiment towards, okay, maybe they're not seeing one public ledger, but they're questioning the legitimacy of these private blockchains.
Yes, because there is an argument that private blockchains are what big business requires to build its confidence in public blockchain. Mm-hmm. Would you go along with that?
I do see that as kind of a stepping stone.
But you don't want to put their foot on that stepping stone. You'd rather jump straight.
I actually refuse to do that. Yeah, that's right. I actually will not. I will not touch the private because, in my view, it is a waste of time.
What exactly is what is wrong with the private blockchain then?
To me, we already have this cloud server model where more and more clients are taking hardware out of on-site location, and they're using Azure, they're using Amazon Web Services. To me, if we're going to come in as a value-added reseller to bring them Microsoft software and implement for them, we're already, part of that solution is more cloud servers. To me, it's crazy to additionally add, okay, you now have Microsoft, you have a ERP, you have a SQL database. Now you need to integrate that to some other cloud server that's running a private blockchain. To me, the word should stand for itself. It's like, why would I pay for this if I'm already paying for these 5 Azure machines? Now you're going to make me pay for the 6th one.
In that sense, it's just more of the same.
Yeah. Where's the benefit? To me, there's more cost.
So if I'm the client and I say, well, fine, I can sort of see that, but what exactly is the benefit if I do what you're suggesting? What would you say?
I would say that not only is it cheaper than adding that 6th machine / private blockchain, but you'll be able to streamline business processes such that you'll have cost savings elsewhere. So even though you're adding a tiny bit of cost to integrate to BSV, you'll more than recoup that and have gains in other parts of your system, financial, supply chain, communication with vendors, that your costs will go down, and naturally that increases profitability.
So you're obviously personally pretty committed to BSV.
Yes.
Do you see the sort of the critical thing between where we are now and where we want to go with BSV as depending on the kind of work you're talking about with big business, or is it rather lots of billions of people using it on their phones and stuff?
The first one. I see it dependent on that aspect, because that will increase the transaction count, which will increase the demand, which will naturally increase the price and get other people, more retail or just regular users of the system, more interested. So I think that's the path forward, because that will bring in the other side, not the other way around.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's sort of slightly the other way from what happened in the internet adoption, where it was sort of individual users with their little tiny websites built at home and stuff, almost I think before airlines and people were using it to check in and stuff. So it was sort of bottom up, whereas this kind of revolution seems to be more of a, in terms of adoption, more of a top-down process, probably.
It does seem like that, yeah.
And do you think that the existing players like Microsoft and the other big companies, are they going to be the victims of this, or will they adopt it and push it through?
I think that given what we've seen over the past year, where it's IBM, Microsoft, and now Amazon trying to release their own blockchains or blockchain software products, whatever, if BSV does start making moves in the industry, they will be victims unless they adapt and start to use it. So it's really going to depend on their adjustment period. But they could end up losing, it could be just a venture that goes nowhere for them, which I'm sure they've probably already considered. But so it's going to depend on how quickly they adjust.
So by making the moves to their own blockchain and stuff like you mentioned, it's a sort of a defensive maneuver rather than the more disruptive move that they probably would need to make if BSV is successful in the rest of the world.
I can see it that way. I think that they don't know. I think my opinion is they have no idea about something like SV, or that a public ledger is even viable. I think if they did, they wouldn't try to build their own solutions in the first place. Because I think it's similar to why we have all these other cryptocurrencies, is that they saw Bitcoin and they saw the scaling, and they think they see something that is flawed. So they think, like everybody else, I could just create something better and take some of that market share.
And are you convinced that Bitcoin SV is unique and the one that we need to focus on?
Yes.
Why is that?
For a few reasons. One is the Metanet concept. So it's really the idea of putting data on chain and having users take control of their data. To me, it is a upgrade on the way the internet works today. So from that aspect, it just makes sense. If anyone who's technical and understands how the internet works, and they look at the concept of Metanet objectively, which is difficult, right? You will see that the way we do things now is flawed compared to and more ideal and cost saving. So a small example is if I email someone in a file, an Excel spreadsheet, to 20 people, I have effectively copied that file 20 times when there's no need for that. And then I'm sending it to 20 different places. Why wouldn't I just put it one time, one place, and have everyone access
Well, you
that?
could just upload it to Google Drive.
Of course, but then that's permissioned, right? And you're trusting Google, who has a server sitting on the edge of the network. Whereas with Bitcoin, you would have that right front and center, and then it's one hop away from everybody else.
Right.
So if you take that concept and you just start applying it to almost everything, all data, music, audio, video, even the cost savings for someone like a music provider or Netflix starts being put into perspective, right? Because now I'm sure their server costs are pretty high with bandwidth and all that stuff. But if they were managing that on a public ledger, where a lot of that infrastructure is now deferred, and then security too on their end, they just have to secure the access to the chain. They don't actually have to secure it themselves. That's the miner's job, right? So now they can take their same business model, change out the architecture, reduce costs by some crazy percentage, and now they're making more money while still providing probably a better service for their customers.
And do you think that it's going to be through individuals like yourself and the other people who are coming to the conference and so on, who are kind of evangelists for this? Is that going to be enough to kind of get this movement up to scale?
I think it has to start somewhere, and it has to be, people have to branch out and reach others as they build this thing out. So one thing I kept thinking when I walked away from the conference last year is, if we don't make this happen, then it's not going to happen. So through educating others, to talking to new people, just bringing this stuff up and getting them to realize, just having conversations about it, you can spread it, and then other people start seeing the benefits, and then they spread it, and then you have a ripple effect. So is it enough by itself? No. Yes, those efforts can make a lot of headway towards that goal, but to also spread it out, which I think is just a natural consequence of them working on it anyway.
I was talking to the inventor of Weather SV last week, Paul Chiari in Australia, and he was talking about how some of the work of Unwrite, who's this mysterious developer for Bitcoin SV, and other people have produced software that people like he can now build on. And it seemed to me like we're kind of closing the gap between the level at which you really need to be a hardcore coding kind of person and people who are more interested in what the product's going to look like, what the business model is going to be. And perhaps when that chain is reachable from both ends, that will be what enables this to really take off.
Yes, 100%. I would say Unwriter's tools have taken people's excuses away, because even at the conference in November, I was complaining about how we don't have tools to do some of this stuff. So in order for me to build something last year that would have been able to interact with the ERP, it would have taken, I don't know how long, and it wouldn't have been secure. It would have taken too much coding, just too much low-level stuff, to your point about, hardcore developers, which we should not have to do in an enterprise application. We should just make a simple call and it's done, right? Unwriter stuff is providing that, which is great, because it's like a boom. I mean, I think people involved in SV have seen it. Is ever since the new year came, all this stuff came out with the lockdown protocol, knowing that we're going to try to scale. And now, like the guy with Weather SV, he's doing, I think, 26,000 transactions a day or something now. And it just makes it easy. So all these ideas that people have now can be implemented much easier. I mean, and it's kind of that concept I keep talking about. If they wanted to do that before, it would take a lot of cost and time, money to build that stuff out. But now they have cost savings. I think Weather SV is a perfect app. I haven't looked too much into it, but I've used it. And I mean, I don't know if they're making money, but they're basically subsidizing the weather exposure APIs with BSV.
Well, the funny thing is that the data that you get by paying your, I think, $5 US, Australian, to get it, is available publicly anyway. You could have access to this data from the store that they get it from. But in a way, what's rather encouraging about that is that people are so interested and willing to use their money button to send $5. It makes me think, well, if there's something that you could buy that you couldn't get, well, they'll be even more interested.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, this Unwriter is such a interesting. Do you have any theories about who that might be, or where they are, or anything about them?
I don't have any real theories about it.
Could it be just one person?
My personal belief is that it's one person. I know I've heard other folks think it's a group because of this content, but I've looked at some of the code, and it's not a lot of code. It's just very simple, efficient, and powerful. And I also think the Twitter account, the Slack, the documentation, the voice, if you're reading in it, it's kind of uniform to me.
Does Unwrite write prose? I didn't know that. I mean, does he write paragraphs that explain what he or she is doing.
Their documentation is extremely robust and good.
And written in what, English that sounds like a first language, or?
Yes, yep, for sure. And I just think the way they write across those platforms is too consistent for it to be a group. Now you could say, okay, maybe there's a dev is the other person and that's the documentation person. But given that understanding, I don't know. I will say I think they have an agenda, clearly. They have goals that they want to enable others to build on SV.
Yeah. So we talked a bit about where you've got to. What would you like to achieve? What are you hoping to achieve in the next, say, 6 months or a year?
My goal is to demonstrate to my company how Bitcoin can be used integrating with systems that it's in a way that streamlines business processes and overtly reduces costs. I really want to take away really that it's even Bitcoin. Just show them this method of data transportation that you can use. So you take all of the political aspects and the cryptocurrency, you take all that out and just demonstrate where no one can look at this solution and say, I'm not going to use that because it's much more efficient than what's going on today.
Terrific. Well, very good luck and thank you very much, Joshua.
Oh, thank you.
My thanks to Joshua Henslee. Please join me next week for the final episode in this first season of CoinGeek Conversations. But we'll be back after a modest 4-week hiatus and raring to go again at the start of September. Thanks for listening, and till next week, goodbye.